Hi, my name is Tom Wright. A lot of people ask me about my workflow from Blender to the Unreal Engine, and with the new Blender 2.8 and the new Eevee viewport renderer, it only takes a few tweaks to get things looking pretty close to what they look like in the Unreal Engine. The only caveat is you need to change your scale in Blender, and that can mess up a few things in Eevee, but I'm going to show you how to get past that so things can look like this. This is the same object, same material, or same textures on a material in the Unreal Engine. So my goal here is to show you how to create a startup file, basically my startup file, where I get the most accurate look in Blender to the Unreal Engine. And also as a bonus, I'm going to show you how I set up a texture, a material that I've exported out of Substance, how to set up those image textures in Blender to accurately represent what they're going to look like in Unreal. So I hope this will help, and yeah, let's get started. Here we have the standard 2.8 scene with its standard assets. First thing we want to do is get rid of these assets because we're about to scale this entire scene up 100-fold. We don't want these things hanging around being little pieces of stuff in the sitting at 0, right? So let's select them all, hit X, and delete them. In order to scale this scene properly, we want to be over here in the units, or the scene tab in the units drop down. So drop down that units. Mine's already set to metric. All we need to do is change this 1 to a 0.01. Now we can actually zoom out to see the proper scene, but notice that it's clipping out here. That's the viewport clipping. In order to fix that, you hit the in key, get this in panel, and you'll see this clip start and end. We just need to make these 100 times longer or 100 times larger. So this 0.001 needs to be a 0.1. So get rid of a couple of zeros. And then we want to add a couple of zeros here. 10 is going to be 1,000. So now we have the scene the way it was before. I can hit in and get rid of that panel. It's now safe to import at this point because anything you would import before this would be scaled incorrectly. It would actually try to scale itself to the Blender default. So let's import that Unreal sphere. Import. I'm going to paste in the location. Oh, it didn't work. I will copy it from here and paste it. Meshes. There we go. Double click that guy, and here's our sphere. So this is the sphere in at the proper scale also. So the next thing we have or want to create, because it's in the Unreal standard view, is this is a ground plane. So Shift A, Mesh, Plane. I'm going to scale this guy up about 10 times. S10 and Enter. And this is about the size of the one in Unreal, the ground plane here. Their ground plane is a perfect mid-gray, so we'll have to do that here in a second. But let's first switch over to the Eevee renderer. So if you're in Scene here, make sure your render engine is set to Eevee, and then select this far right circle, which should put you in the Eevee viewport. One of the things you'll notice is when you export something from Unreal like this, it brings along its material, or tries to. It's pretty inaccurate, so just kind of ignore this for the time being. We'll fix the material later on in this video. I first want to show you how to set up the scene. In case you already know how to fix these materials, I want to get through this a little bit quicker. So one of the things we're going to do, next thing we're going to do rather, is we're going to set up the background here. This background isn't just for reflection, it's an HDR image, a high dynamic range image that pushes in light and reflection. So let's make a new window, make this into a shader editor. Instead of object here, we want to be in world, because that's what we're going to be working on, the world. select Use Nodes so we can see the nodes. So we're going to add a node, a texture, environment texture. And this environment texture is going to be the Epic Daylight HDR. You can export this straight out of the engine, the Unreal Engine. So I'm going to select that guy, open it up, plug it in, and that will calculate with the proper HDR. So when you look down the front side of this, these objects, actually I kind of tend to look down the side. We're generally looking out into the parking lot. And in order to fix this here in Blender, we need to add a couple of nodes here. So if we Shift A and go here to Vector, select Mapping, that will be the mapping node that will allow us to move this background image around. If we plug it in directly, it'll just disappear because it doesn't know where it's getting its vector from. So if we Shift A, go to Input, and select Texture Coordinates, we can tell it where to get these coordinates. We're just going to do Generated, set it to 0. So now we can actually rotate the background image. You'll have to look at your version of Unreal and see what's where this image lies. I find that it tends to lie in different places on however people have it set up. For me, I'm just going to rotate it a little bit to be looking down the side of the building here. This is the Epic Games campus. And that pretty much sets up the environment piece of the world. One of the things I've noticed though is the ground is reflecting, and of course the ground in Unreal Engine does not reflect. So let's jump back over to Object, create a material for that ground, and make a couple of changes. The first will be roughness. We don't want any smooth part of the ground, so let's set that all the way to 1. And then we'll set the base color, RGB. It's a 0.8. The one in Epic or the Unreal Engine is exactly gray, so let's change that to 0.5, and that'll finish off the ground. So we can move on now to creating the light to try to emulate the one in the engine. So I'm going to Shift A, go down here to Light, and add a sunlight. Let's place it more accurately to what it is in Unreal. So we'll rotate it up, look down the top, rotate it toward the side a little bit. And if we notice in Unreal, the shadow kind of comes out here. So that should be pretty close to what we have. But notice there's no shadows here. So we're going to have to make some changes to this light. And it's all based on that scale that we changed. So if we select the light, it's a sunlight. Its strength is a 10, which in Unreal Engine it's a 1. So let's change that first. Change that to a 1. I find that this radius is far too large. You can actually turn this all the way to 0 if you want to, or add a little bit, maybe 0.001. I'm just going to leave mine at 0. That's more accurate to what you'll get in Unreal. And then under Shadow, see, we have clipping planes again, just like we did on the viewport. So we got to make these 100 times larger. So 0.5 meter instead of 0.005. This guy here can, I guess it would be 40 meters, but in this case, I'm just going to make this 4 meters. That should be plenty. We don't want it drawing too far out. Then this cascade, because you still notice there's still no shadow here. And that's because the max distance of the cascade is only set to 2 meters. So let's jump that up to about 10 meters. And hey, we got some shadows now. They're not very good shadows, but we got some shadows. Let's fix these errors, these issues. For our light, just to go through this again, once we created it, we changed the intensity, the radius, and the shadow clipping planes along with the cascade. I also like to add this contact shadow here. This looks pretty nice when it's working properly. but it also has a couple of distances that need to be changed. So instead of 0.002, let's change that to 0.2. Same with the thickness. And we'll have that on. So that should be all the settings that you need for the shadow. Let's jump over here to the actual scene settings and get these shadows working properly. And that's going to be, of course, under the shadow drop down. If you change this ESM to VSM, that gives you a much softer fall off. And then make sure you turn on this high bit depth, and that'll get rid of all these errors. The other thing I do personally is I crank up these settings. I just max them out. If your computer can handle it, you'll notice you'll get a nice, much more clean shadow from cranking those up. And that's the cube size and cascade size. So the next thing I like to do is I like to turn on a little ambient occlusion, because the Unreal Engine uses ambient occlusion by default. So I'm going to turn this on. Once again, we have the scale, the distance issue, because we changed the scale. So make sure you make it 100 times larger. Blender's ambient occlusion is pretty dark, so I like to turn this factor down from 1 to about 0.5. So yeah, that's pretty darn accurate there. The only weird thing is in the scene, or it's not really weird, it's just that there's a difference in color management from Blender to Unreal. But we can get really close because we have this color management setting in the entire scene. What we're set to is filmic, which is probably the best when you're rendering in cycles to be able to give you the broadest range. But I find this not very accurate for going to Unreal. So if you turn this to default, it will add a little bit more compression. And what's cool is you have all these looks, different to simulate different cameras. And for me, I've gone through just about every one of these, and this Kodak DSCS 3155 tends to be the closest to the Unreal Engine. I'm not sure what Unreal Engine uses for a lookup table, but this is pretty darn close. So if you select that, you'll get a much warmer image now. So again, that's in the color management, your view transform to default and your look to the Kodak 3155. That'll give you a pretty darn close approximation of the Unreal scene. At this point, if you don't want to watch me set up this substance material, you can actually stop here and start working, because this is the main piece of what I wanted to show you. But I'm also going to show you how to set up this substance, this particular Unreal material, and how these things come in and how to be set up properly. So let's go into that real quick. I'll select the sphere. Let's pull down this guy. Material. These are the material nodes for the sphere that came in automatically from Unreal. I'm not going to use them because I don't know what they are. So I'm just, for me, I'm not sure where this comes from, and it's gonna pick up the same maps once I drag them in, which is okay. It's just that at least I'll know exactly where they're coming from. So I'm going to delete these two, and make sure you set, or at least look at this. If you're going to use this node, node that came with it, the normal map node, make sure its strength is set to 1, because I'm not sure where it gets the 0.14. Doesn't really matter. And we're going to drag in some images, the original images that were created out of Substance. This is Material 1, which is what I'm on, and this is what I've named these guys. So that's the color, that's the normal map, and that's the weird Substance image that I'll explain right now. These images are basically combined black and white images to save space, to save draw calls, really. And this image really holds 3 images. It's R, G, and B are holding occlusion, metallic, and roughness. So you'll need to separate these and then plug them into the right place, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. But let's start at the top with the color image, and we can simply, for now, plug this in, and we'll get the color. Then the normal map, we'll have to switch that, just like always, to non-color data, and then we'll plug that guy in to color. So one of the strange things that you might notice about the normal maps from Blender to Unreal, or from really anywhere to Unreal Engine, is they're inverted on the depth. So these rust pieces are actually poking out here on Blender, and they're going in on Unreal, and it's because Unreal, it flips the green channel of these maps, and if you're exporting something based on Unreal settings from Substance, it's going to do that for you. It's going to flip those channels so that it can go directly into Unreal. So we need to flip them back, and it's really easy to do. First thing we need to do is separate them. So if you Shift A, go down here to Convert and separate RGB. I'm going to go ahead and make the Combine also, because if you separate and combine, you haven't made any changes if we just plug them directly in. Oops, that's a second separate. Let's instead grab Combine RGB. And then we need one invert under Color, Invert, and that one invert is going to be the green. So red can go to red, green is going to get inverted, go back to green, and then blue is going to go to blue. You want to make sure you do this before it goes into the normal map. So plug that into there, image, and then image to color, and you'll notice that it just inverted that rust. The entire normal map inverted on its normal. So that's just inverting the green channel. So that's done. Now let's separate these maps. Shift A, converter rather, separate RGB, plug that in. Remember what I said, red is occlusion, green is roughness, and blue is metal. We don't have an occlusion, ambient occlusion plugin here. So one of the things, what we can do to fix that is that we can plug it directly into the color, multiply it directly in. So if we go color, mix RGB, you can actually change this mix to a multiply. And then we're going to multiply this color, or this image, with this image, and just set this to 1 because it's going to full on multiply, and we'll plug that in. And it's mostly noticeable. Let's look at the viewport. That's 0 is, it's just this image, whereas 1 is the multiply. So if you want to play with it, you can go to 0 to 1, and you can kind of see where that multiply, where that occlusion is happening. So the rest of it's pretty easy. Blue or green is going to go to roughness. Blue is going to go to metal. The only other thing is I tend to find that Blender is a little more smooth than Unreal. So there's an easy way to fix this. We can just add another one of those color mixes and mix it right there before it goes into the roughness. I set this to pure white, and then I do I make the adjustment here in the factor. That's just me. If you set to 0, it's as if this node doesn't exist. But if you put a little bit, 0.15 is what I usually do, put a little bit of white, it'll start to blur that reflection. And this is much more like it looks in the Unreal Engine. So this node setup is pretty much all there is. We can copy and paste this into the other materials, because there's 3 materials here. So you can select all of this, Control C, switch materials, select all that, and get rid of it, and then Control V. And from here, all you need to do is add in the proper images. So for me, this would be Mat 2. There's the color. Mat 2. This guy. I don't even know what to call that node. And then here's the normal map for Mat 2. And that's the proper inside of that. We can do the same thing here to 3. Make sure we got it all selected. Delete that. Control V. And again, just go through and select the correct images. Map 3. There's the color. Here's the substance image, and then the normal map. And that's it. So this is now set up correctly and pretty much looks like I was showing you before. This is as close as I've gotten anything to Unreal, and it's pretty darn close, guys. So I hope this helps your workflow, and I'll see you next time.